At the Home Depot, we make it easy to turn your to-do list into a done list with our speedy delivery options. Need something in a hurry? We offer next day and even same day delivery on a wide variety of products. The best part is you can order straight from your couch. Our team is ready to help and get your order to you same day if it's placed by 4 p.m. on select products. When shopping online, filter by delivery to see availability options. Delivery at the speed you need, only at the Home Depot. We are back on the Falcons Audible presented by AT&T. Falcons come up short to the Los Angeles Chargers. 17-13, the record falls to 6-6 on the season. That's DJ Shockley, Dave Archer. I'm Derek Rackley. We're here to break it down for you and then look ahead to the next week. But guys, we have to talk about this past game, and the easy thing to ask is what went wrong. And we know the interceptions from the quarterback position. We'll talk a little bit about that. But DJ, let me just start with you. Kind of more bigger picture, again, I'll just repeat the question. Like, what went wrong to you in this game that got Falcons on the bad side of the win-loss column?
I think it would be wrong of us to not mention, obviously, turnovers in this ballgame. Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned it, and it's a big part of things that you got to do. And it's a big part of this ballgame. And you knew coming into this game, this was a defense that wanted to get after you. You knew they had, guys on the edges who were really good players. So you come in thinking, okay, we got to make sure we shore up the edges and protect the quarterback in this golf game. You had a guy on the back end who made a bunch of plays for them in Derwin James, a guy who stayed around the line of scrimmage and did a lot of different things. Ultimately, when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, it's the continued stress of turning the football over. It's the continued stress of not being able to put points on the football on the board, and that's part of the game. Obviously, you have those moments, but you think coming off a bye week, you play a little bit better on that side of the ball. Now, we're going to get to the defense and how they play, but I think offensively there were a few things in the ball game that you just couldn't get going. The run game was there for most part of it. You think early in the ball game, you felt good about the way they were feeding Bijan. Bijan was a guy who was, I thought Zach was doing a good job of east and west, getting those guys running and, forcing the issue there. They had some good run plays here and there, but then you kind of got away from it a little bit, and it forced you to throw the football a little bit more than probably you wanted to in those situations. And then the decision-making was a big part of the reason why you weren't able to. But I think at the end of the ball game, because of what we talked about with the defense, you still had an opportunity to go win the ball game. Yeah. And I think that's a bigger picture part of it is, we had a lot of mistakes, had a lot of things that happened throughout the ball game, a lot of things that I'm sure the Falcons and, individual players will want back, but you had a chance to win late in the ball game, so you have to be able to shore some of those things up. Yeah,
thinking about it at that point, let's just call it, midway through the fourth quarter, they'd thrown 3 interceptions, but yet they were still in the game. Mm-hmm. Like they were one drive away from getting back in the game, if not taking the lead. And you kind of talked about it, DJ, and Arch, I'll tee you up with this. I mean, we knew coming into it, one of my keys to the game was that points were going to be at a premium because you're facing a Chargers defense that coming into the game was allowing less than 16 points per game. That was number 1 in the NFL. Not only was it number 1 in the NFL, it was 4th best in Chargers history through 11 games. So their defense was doing some special things. But yet, in the second half, you felt like because you're trailing, Arch, you kind of have to force the ball downfield a little bit because you're playing catch-up, and then the turnover started to mount.
Yeah, I think that this game took on a different tenor for me because this was a Charger team. The previous 4 games, they were on a 4-game winning streak coming in. It opened 3-3 and then won 4 straight. In those 4 games, they were averaging 28.5 points per game. So I thought, okay, one of my keys, very similar to yours, was you got to finish drives. Mm-hmm. You got to put points on the board. So finish drives, and that doesn't mean, make the field goal if you have to settle for that. But let's finish with touchdowns because this team's going to score. And we knew that defensively we had struggled 2 weeks ago, so you kind of felt weren't sure about that.
Yep.
All of a sudden the game took a different form for me. Defense all of a sudden is bowing its back. The Chargers can't move the football. You get an early takeaway. I mean, they're playing at a different level, and now all of a sudden the game changes a little bit where maybe you can be a little more conservative. And like Shock's saying, maybe you do stay a little bit more with the run game and pound them. And that was part of the plan early on was you knew you had Bosa and you had Mack coming off the edge. What do you do to pass rushers? You try to bloody their nose in the run game. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they did. They came off the ball, and they were pounding them with the run game. Pretty good balance if you look at it. 39 throws, 37 runs,
yeah.
if you're looking at it that way from a balance standpoint.
Yeah.
But the game kind of changed a little bit for me as to what you needed to pursue and how aggressive you needed to be. Now, Raheem still kept his, riverboat gambler hat on a little bit in going for it on fourth down because he wanted to try to maintain some momentum for the offense as you get stuff going.
Yep.
Now, some of that we did a really good job of converting. Some of it hit us in the face because we threw a couple interceptions. So, again, kind of one of those uneven, sketchy games on the offensive side of the football. But all of a sudden, the other side of the ball played championship-level football.
Yeah, and I want to get to the defense here shortly, but it's rare that you come onto a podcast like this and you got two former quarterbacks, right? So I want to talk to you guys about trying to put yourself inside the ears of Kirk Cousins because he ends up having arguably the worst or the second worst game. I mean, it's the second time in his career that he's thrown 4 interceptions in a game, so you could say it's tied for the worst game in his career. So I don't know if you guys ever had a 4-interception game. Maybe it was a 3-interception game, but how do you respond from a performance like that, number one, and number two, add on top of it that Kirk's going to go back to a team that he just came from and he's going to have some of the memories and all that stuff. So how do you kind of unpack that as a former quarterback trying to move forward to next week, Arch?
Well, tongue-in-cheek a little bit here in that if you get to your third interception, Shock may echo this, you're looking to turn and hand the ball to somebody at that point.
Get out of my hand, no doubt.
Because clearly I've got some color blindness here. I can't find the right guy.
18 force. Good call, Coach.
I'm checking out around pass plays, and I'm tossing it to number 7 or Tyler Algier in the backfield. In all seriousness, no. What you've got to do is you've got to go back and evaluate where you were mentally. You'll check through all your reads. What were you looking at? Where did your eyes go? And this will be private time for Kirk yesterday and today because he's got to move on. He's got to push it in the rearview mirror and move to Wednesday as game plan day comes. Shock, you know about that. So now I'm going to go in and maybe over-evaluate what I'm doing and say, okay, were my drops the deep at the proper depth? Was I rushing, trying to get the ball out, which changed the timing? Was I seeing coverage properly? What was my keys that I was looking at? Because he clearly got fooled a couple times. And you don't normally see it with a veteran quarterback. He got fooled by coverage a couple times. The pick six, he gets fooled on it because the same look they went zero coverage out of that same look. And so he gets a pre-snap look of it, and then he drops and throws, and he thinks he's got the same look, and all of a sudden you got a cloud corner with safety over the top, and it's a pick six. So those kind of things, and every quarterback's done it, Shock. I know you and I both have done it where you misread something and it nets something bad. The worst thing can be a pick six. But that's what I think he will do. He'll take stock in all the good things he's done, but also you got to go back and you got to be really hard on yourself. Okay, is the depths of my drops the proper depth to match the receivers and what they're doing? Yep. Am I in the proper place in the pocket? Am I looking at the right stuff pre-snap? Because you'll have the all-22, and we can remember every play, right,
Absolutely,
Chuck? And it's like you remember the bad plays better than you do the good plays.
Yep.
But you can go through and you can remember looking at the all-22. Okay, I was looking at the strong. I was looking at Derwin James, and where did I get fooled there? And because this is a copycat league,
it's going to happen
and Minnesota's
again.
got their style and their plan, but if they saw something that the Chargers were really successful with, you can bet you're going to see it this weekend.
They're going to try to exploit it. And so, Shock, I know you were here at one point in high school and in college where all the focus was on you. Everybody was looking at you at the quarterback position. And then even during your NFL career, you sat in the same meeting room with Michael Vick, and you got a chance to break down all the times when everybody was looking at Michael Vick because of his star power and where he was in relation to the NFL and all of professional sports at that time. Anytime he had a bad game, you got to go in those same meeting rooms and listen and hear what he thought, what he saw, and how you adjust after it. And I'll just throw this out, is that it's a tough time. Like Arch said, that this is a tough 2 days for Kirk Cousins because everybody is pointing the finger at him, okay? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that, people aren't going to feel sorry for him. That's what happens when you make a lot of money in the National Football League. They're expecting production, okay? But these are the tough weeks when you got to sit back and you got to take all the heat.
Yeah.
So how is that? Does that go for a quarterback, Shock? How difficult is a week taking all the heat, number one, and then rebounding the next week?
First, Arch did such a great job of breaking down exactly the mental part of what you have to do as a quarterback. And there's nothing else I want to add to that because the first thing that came to my mind was, are you seeing coverage? And that's the first thing he brought up. And mentally, it's one of those type of things where the next best thing that you can do is, after you've acknowledged it, you watched it, you understand what's going on, the next best thing that you want to do is to immediately get back on the field. You immediately want to get back on the practice field. You want to get back into a game, because I don't care how long you played, if you've had that kind of performance, you lose a little confidence. Mm-hmm. And the best thing you can do is to go out and go through those same exact plays, see those exact coverages, and then you make the adjustment there and you change and you go forward. And if I'm in that position, the best thing that I want to do was be able to go out and play better. So I want to get on the field. I want to get on the practice field. I want to talk through with my guys. I wanted to make sure that they understood that, yeah, that was a bad situation for me. Yeah, maybe I didn't see something the best way I could, but here's how I'm going to respond. And I think that's the best way, is getting back on the field and understanding that, hey, this is a tough part. You mentioned it. I was here with a guy named Michael Vick, who wasn't just the face of our team, he was the face of the entire NFL. So I got a chance to sit in those meeting rooms and see the things he go through, watch him on the sideline. And then a couple years later, the next guy who you think about is probably the next face of this organization was Matt Ryan. So I sat in the room with both of those guys throughout my career and saw how they handle tough situations. And they handled them differently, but at the end of the day, the only thing that made it better was getting out and doing it better the next time. And I think that's what this situation is about. Arch just mentioned it. After the game, I'm sure he pulled up the iPad and started watching it immediately on Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And then you talking about Monday getting back in and watching it again. Tuesday, ain't no off day for a guy like Kirk Cousins. Mm-hmm. He's going to be watching it again. And then you got to move on. And as we know, the team you're facing this week, you know them really well. It's going to be a lot of emotion going into it. But beyond all that, you got another really good defense coming in. So you don't have time to sit back and sulk and worry about it and, harp on it. You got to move on, make the corrections, and then get back on the practice field and get better with your guys.
Yeah, and you mentioned moving on. One of the best traits that a quarterback can have at any level is a short-term memory.
For sure.
You have got to be able to flush it at some point, and just like you said, Shock, when they show up on Wednesday morning to start prep work for the Minnesota Vikings, it's all about the Vikings. Yeah. It ain't about what happened last week. Right. Because the moment you start thinking about stuff that happened last week, that's when you lose the confidence, and the moments that happened last week are going to come back. Now, before we do talk about that Minnesota Vikings defense, I think we need to talk about a little bit about the Falcons defense. It was a loss, okay? So in the NFL, you don't go downstairs in the locker room and celebrate after a loss. Yeah. But there are some positives to take away, because the defense had been maligned going into the bye week. And then you're facing a quarterback in Justin Herbert who got off to a slow start this season, but in October and November, he was averaging well over 260 yards a game through the air. They were scoring points. You talked about the winning streak, and they basically shut them down, especially in the second half. The only points that were scored in the second half came off the pick six. Yeah. And the offense was very pedestrian. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Arch. What were the positives that you saw from the defense against the Chargers that needs to carry over against Minnesota?
Well, number one was they were refreshed and renewed. Okay, it looked like guys that had fresh legs. And now it'll change a little bit, because now you got another game under your belt as you get ready to go to Minnesota. You got to get on a plane and travel. Having guys back on the field, the rotation at linebacker, I thought that helped Caden Ellis and Nate Landman, who had been doing yeoman's work, because remember, Troy Anderson and J.T. Bertrand have been down virtually the whole middle part of the year here, and those two guys have been on the field the entire time. I thought they looked refreshed and renewed, and it also looked cool to have Troy Anderson back on the field. Troy was back out there rotating in. D. Alford was back on the field. To me, D. Alford is one of the most important players on the defense.
I agree.
The nickel back and the two-way go, I've talked a number of times about that. And in all honesty, I don't think that we have anybody else that can play that position the way he does. Yeah. So I thought he did a good job. Even though Ladd McConkey had some catches, they shut him down in the second half. They went to a double, and credit the defense and Jimmy Lake for making an adjustment to take Ladd McConkey away. I think he had, Shock, 8 grabs for about 100 yards in the first half.
He was on fire.
Yeah, he was killing him on that deep over route. They took that away, and all of a sudden you look up, and the Chargers, I think, had 32 yards of offense in the second half. I mean, it was unbelievable. They were 3 for 11 on third down. They completely shut them. 189 yards of total offense for a Charger team that Rack just talked about was ripping it up over the last 4 or 5 weeks. What they did from a schematic standpoint, I thought, was they really did a good job with their stunts up front. Now, Justin Herbert is a guy that has a history of holding the ball. So you knew that you could run some of your stunts up front. He was going to hold it and wait to try to take shots downfield. He's kind of like Ben Roethlisberger used to be. Remember how Big Ben would stand in there and knock guys off of him and wait? Herbert's a gigantic dude, 6'6", 245 pounds. He's going to kind of do that, and he can run too. I thought that was the part that was really cool about it was, they got to him, put him on the ground 5 times, 5 sacks, 2 for Arnold Ebiketie. But some of it was secondary stuff where he got out of the pocket and they didn't let him run because he had run for first downs. You go back and look at tape of the Chargers. He had run for first downs and extended drives that had allowed them to be as proficient as they'd been offensively over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They took all of that away. So I thought that the defensive line, the refreshness first of all, but the defensive line and what Jimmy Lake and his staff did defensively to coordinate some of their stunts, they were much more timed up. Guys were in their lanes rushing the passer, and then they pursued and got him on the ground. That was what stuck out for me.
One thing to add that I thought Arch mentioned the way they went about, shutting down Ladd in that second half and making adjustments, and I thought it was, phenomenal. There's a time Ladd McConkey comes across in motion, and he's that inside slot guy where he was winning a lot of the time, made a bunch of plays on the inside, and it looks like nobody's on top of him. Matthew Judon, snapping the football, comes out, get hands on Ladd, forces him to, kind of reroute, and then here comes D. Alford over the top, and you can see coming off the football, Herbert's looking at Ladd right away. And because of all the disruption and they're getting hands on him and it looks like Judon was going to rush, now he has to go somewhere else. And it ends up being he's holding on to the football even more. So you're talking about just small adjustments within the ball game, within the scheme that helps you. That's one instance where you look at it and say, you know what? Yeah, they're making the adjustments that are needed to go win ball games, even when a guy is playing at a high level like Ladd was. And I thought he did a phenomenal job of trying to shut him down in that second half.
Yeah, and the back shocks up, and exactly what he's talking about. There was a concerted effort. We had talked about how we play at depth a lot in the secondary. If you notice, that secondary crept up a little bit more. You saw AJ up, bump, and run. You saw Clark Phillips up tighter. D was up tighter following. And so they had made a concerted effort. They knew that we've got to get the quarterback to hold the football like Shock's talking about to be able to get home and get some sacks. And so the back end serviced the front end and vice versa. I thought it was a much they played in concert with one another. And I thought that the adjustment, like Shock's talking about, both on the back end and the front end were paramount as in their effort this week.
Yeah, I mean, just 187 yards of offense, no touchdowns, as we talked about in the second half. I mean, that's the type of defensive performance that generally wins football games, but unfortunately, as we mentioned, Atlanta Falcons come up short to the Chargers. So let's talk about next week because, as you said, there's not going to be a week off, figuratively and literally, because the Falcons are going to go on the road to face, as we mentioned, Kirk Cousins' former team, the Minnesota Vikings, that just happened to be 10-2 on the season, which – so I guess too bad for them, is only good enough for second place in their division because the Detroit Lions are at 11-1. 10-2, by the way, is tied for the second best record in the National Football League, but it's only good enough for second in their division. NFC North this year is one of the best divisions in all of football. Green Bay Packers sitting behind them in third at 9-3 this year. And we're talking about a Vikings team that is not a J.J. McCarthy-led team, obviously not a Kirk Cousins-led team. It's a Sam Darnold-led 10-2 football team. So, Shock, let me start with you and just kind of give a little bit of a background as far as what the Vikings look like this year and why they've had so much success.
Yeah, it's been interesting because you think you move on from a guy like Kirk Cousins and then they go out and draft J.J. McCarthy. You think, okay, they're changing the guard a little bit. They're bringing in this young guy and, it's going to take a little time. And you look up and McCarthy's hurt. And then here comes Sam Darnold. He has a rejuvenation of his career, and he's playing really efficient football. They bring over Aaron Jones from Green Bay. You know how good he has been when he was there. Adding a run game. We've talked about it numerous times how a run game helps a quarterback be more efficient. He's completing 67% of his passes. Mm-hmm. And, he's got a dude on the outside who's second in the league in receptions and yards.
He's got a dude, all right.
And that man, Justin Jefferson. So, I mean, you're talking about having playmakers on the outside that absolutely is going to help you. You got 6 pass catchers that have over 200 yards or more. And the only thing you look up is Hey, Sam Darnold's your second leading rusher, too. Come on, well, what are we talking about here? Sam Darnold is running the football. He's got 187 yards rushing this season. Aaron Jones has been good for him. Jordan Addison, T.J. Hockenson. I mean, you talk about having weapons on the outside that'll help a quarterback, and they're doing a good job of being efficient with him. But the other thing is, what we saw this week, we were able to get 5 sacks. He's been sacked 36 times this season, which is interesting in his own right. That, they've been efficient and they've scored points and they got all these weapons, but he will take some sacks, but also there has been some breakdowns up front. So this is a very good team on the offensive side of football that wants to throw it around, make plays, and they got guys at all 3 levels of that offense to make plays for you. It's going to be another tough task for this defense, but I'm sure they're looking forward to the task.
Arch, if you could look at the offensive and defensive unit for the Vikings, which one do you think poses the biggest challenge for Atlanta?
Well, I think that I think it's going to be the defensive side of the ball because of our sketchy, play a quarter up and down. That's a better way to say it, up and down offensively. So we're trying to kind of still searching for an identity offensively. I think we've seen some pretty good defensive performances, and this last one, you got to have a lot of confidence coming in. Shock makes a great reference in the fact that this is a guy that's going to hold the ball some, so very similar to Herbert in the fact that he's going to hold it, plus they've had some breakdowns up front in giving up 3 sacks per game, essentially. But defensively, they can flat get after you too. They got 39 sacks on the year. They can, and they've got different blitz packages and things. If you get in these weird third down positions where they're going to come with some different looks,
That guy, he calls some different stuff over there.
Yeah, absolutely. They do a great, really. Flores does a really good job of some exotic blitzes and things like that. But they've got obviously some playmakers on that side of the ball. Grenard's been pretty good coming off the edge for them. The 39 sacks I mentioned. Murphy's second or third in the league in interceptions with 5. They've got 18 team interceptions, and I think they've taken the ball away 24 times. So they're averaging 2 takeaways per game. We know what kind of got us this last weekend. Cannot turn the football over on the road.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that kind of sticks out to me is we faced the #1 scoring defense in the NFL this past weekend in the Chargers at under 16 points a game. Now we're going to get the #5 defense in the NFL in scoring at 18.3 points per game allowed. So once again, points at a premium. Got to finish drives, Arch. And the other thing that's good to note here as far as matchups is Minnesota's #1 in the NFL in rush defense. And that's obviously a calling card for this Atlanta Falcons team, is using Robinson and Algier and the offensive line to kind of control the line of scrimmage. If there's one thing that we have seen that's been fairly consistent, it's been Bijan Robinson and how he's been able to make plays on the offensive side of the ball. So he's going to have a challenge this week. So speaking of this week, let's talk about kind of what the Falcons are going to have to do. And I'm going to talk about a key, but I'm going to throw this out. You cannot have a key that is turnover margin, because we all know that the turnovers have to get fixed in this game, okay? So I'm going to ask you guys all to think of something other than turnovers, takeaways, or the margin that's going to be important for Atlanta to come away with a victory. Shock, you're up first.
It's interesting you just mentioned it, and I thought about a lot of different things in this ball game, but the one thing that comes to mind is the line of scrimmage. And I think this is going to be a line of scrimmage game. You talk about the #1 rush defense coming in. We have to be physical up front. We have to be able to run the football because of what we all have been talking about is we got to protect Kirk. We got to make sure that he feels comfortable. And that's not just Kirk. That's any quarterback that's playing in this level of football. That if you have a good run game, i.e. what Minnesota has, it helps the quarterback, period. So it's not just all about Kirk in that instance. And then on the other side of the ball, you're talking about being able to get after their quarterback and being able to stop their run. Aaron Jones has been really good. I think this is a line of scrimmage ball game, and if you can win at that part of the game, you got a good chance of winning the entire ball game, because we know if you're not able to protect Kirk, you're not able to get after the quarterback, on the outside it's going to be a field day. So you have to be physical enough up front, and we've shown be able to do that, and we won't shy away from the run game. We've seen it, and I mean, we've watched, all season long where it looks like there's nothing there, and Bijan Robinson makes 3-4 yards out of nothing. And I think that's going to be part of this ball game, is being able to, sometimes we say balance the run game, but I think it's being able to run when you need to. And I don't say you got to go out and run for 150 yards, but if it's 3rd and short, you may go pick it up. if you're in the red zone, let's go run the football and do what we need to do to put points on the ball. So I think it's going to be a game where the line of scrimmage matters. And it's going to be one of those type of atmospheres where if you can get the run game going, then you can, keep that crowd out of it a little bit because it's going to be rocking in Minnesota.
So line of scrimmage, predominantly offensively, is what I'm hearing for you, is a line of scrimmage game. So, Arch, what do you got?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards the three receivers that they're going to deploy, Jefferson, Addison, and then I'm going to count Hawkinson as the other receiver because all three of them are very proficient in beating you and breaking you down. Yeah. Addison's averaging 16 yards of reception. Jefferson's not very far behind him. He's over 1,000 yards. But I'm going to go explosive plays. Okay. And I'm talking about 15-plus yard plays. You might even throw the 10-plus yard run plays in, but explosive plays, make them earn it. And this defense has done a pretty good job of that. You got a little explosive plays? Limit explosive plays. So Shock and I on the same page. And a lot of that's going to have to do with what Shock talked about. Can you control the line of scrimmage? Because we just talked about 39 sacks, or 34 sacks, their quarterback's been sacked. They've sacked the other team's quarterback 39 times, which lends itself right to what Shock's talking about in complement to the run game. So I think we're kind of on the same page there.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with the quarterback here, and mine's gonna be not about turnovers. Mine's just gonna be kind of an extension of what you were talking about. Is Kirk had an idea last week, which was pre-snap, and he kind of had his mind made up. But I think this week is going to be so important for him to trust what he sees pre-snap, confirm it post-snap, right? And I think sometimes what happens is you get into the snap and you're like, oh, I already got it. I know I'm going right here. And then all of a sudden they make one of those adjustments that you talked about because Brian Flores is going to make some very similar adjustments at the snap this week. He is a very savvy defensive mind. Not only does he like to bring pressure, but he's going to find that chink in your armor, if you will, and he's going to make sure you've got it fixed. Right? Whether it's 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 times in the game. He's going to see, does he have it fixed or do we have an opportunity to make a play here? So trust your eyes pre-snap, confirm it post-snap, and then Kirk has got to just let it rip. Let it rip. Because we cannot expect to go into this game and just run the football against the number 1 defense in the NFL on the road and win the game. Yeah. You're going to have to put the ball in the air and make some throws. Trust it pre-snap, confirm it post-snap.
The last thing I want to ask you guys is, obviously him going back to Minnesota is a big deal.
Yeah.
And as much as, he will downplay it, we know it, this is still a place he spent 6 years and had a lot of success. If you guys are in his position, how do you handle it? Do you, hey, I go out early, get all my hugs and, all my laughs out early in the ball game, and then, hey, I lock in? Or how do you go about going back to a place where you had so much success and trying to handle it after coming off what you're coming off?
Yeah. I mean, I'll answer first because I don't think Kirk is the kind of guy that's not going to take any of that stuff at the beginning. So I think he's going to have to shake the hands and hugs and all that stuff and give the daps and catch up with the guys. But then at some point, whether it's, call it 30 minutes before the game or it's, right when they come on the field for pregame warmups and they got the shoulder pads and everything on, like it's lock-in time. Yeah. And that's when you just have to trust your experience as a veteran, right? Like he's seen so many different atmospheres. He knows exactly what the place is going to be like. It's ruckus. Yeah, like give the Vikings crowd credit. Yeah. Like they're one of the loudest fan bases in the National Football League. It's going to be a ruckus environment. So you got to manage it. That's just playing quarterback in the National Football League, Arch.
It's a different week this week in that had the game gone differently against the Chargers, this week would be different. There's a different tenor to this week because you're in that situation now where you're beginning to get down and there is no must win unless it eliminates you from the playoffs. But now that Tampa's drawn even, now you got to go win football games. So there's that tension on it. Then there's the tension of him going back to his old haunts, like you said, and shaking hands with the equipment guy and doing all the kind of stuff and saying hello to all the people he's seen for the last 6 years or whatever it is. But there's also the tension and anxiety that he's going to carry. We're all human beings. He's going to carry with him of not playing very well last week. Yep. And so he's going to carry that into the game too. So there's a little bit more baggage in this game than just him going back to his old team. There's a lot more on the line here. And if there's a guy that you expect to be able to filter all that out mentally, Kirk Cousins is a cerebral a guy as I've ever seen, and that includes all the guys that I've been around. I think he'll be able to filter it out and get ready to go.
It's going to be a huge game for him because obviously what he has to rebound from, I'm sure there's an element inside of him that wants to prove to the coaching staff and the players that not only is he still the guy for the job, but he's the guy that's going to win.
For sure.
And he's the guy that's going to get him into the postseason. Yeah. So this is a very important game, and you mentioned the human element. I'm glad you pointed that out because sometimes people just get so absorbed in the fact that these NFL players making a lot of money. It's fantasy football. It's this, that, and the other. But he's a human being, and he still deals with frustration and anxiety and his upset after his performance this past week, much like you would be if you did something wrong at your job and somebody called you out on it, right? You'd be upset as well. So we'll get a chance to see whether or not Kirk Cousins and the rest of this Atlanta Falcons team can rebound from the loss against the Chargers this Sunday, December 8th, 1 o'clock p.m. on Fox, up in Minnesota, a homecoming of sorts for Kirk Cousins. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Falcons Audible presented by AT&T. Continue to like, subscribe, review at Spotify, iTunes, AtlantaFalcons.com, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast content. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. We'll be back next week. See ya.